He saw the eyes before he saw the child. They were green, quietly green, not the emerald of fables, but the wet green of cedar after a drizzle, turning beneath a hooded fringe of hair as the market's canvas awnings hissed and trembled in the wind. For a split second, James Callahan thought the rain itself had invented them. Then the world arranged to prove him wrong. A small face, pale with the cold, a hand holding a paper cup too carefully for a child, and beside her, a woman in a slate-gray coat who moved with the practiced certainty of someone who believed sidewalks belonged to her. The late autumn market along Ballard's old brick lane was thinning under the weather. The fishermen had already stacked their tubs, the last of the apples were going for a song, and the flower vendor was folding twine with the reverence of a priest. Each breath came out of the crowd like steam from a machine that didn't know it had been switched off. A guitarist under an awning plucked a brave, damp chord. Somewhere, a gull argued with a trash can. Rain silvered the air and stitched the day together with threads too fine to see. James should have kept walking. He had taught himself the ritual of moving forward. Left foot, right foot, breathe. Because walking was the only thing in the world that looked like progress when it wasn't. But the eyes had already reached backward into him, to a room that no longer existed, to a morning that had ended before it began, to a crib with the blanket still tucked at the corners by a mother who never again tucked anything. He stopped between a bin of beets and a basket of persimmons and let the moment lift him like a tide. The child's hand tightened around the paper cup. The logo on it, hand-lettered, whimsical, read Pat's Coffee House. The letters curved like a smile you wanted to trust. Steam rose from the lid and vanished. She was shivering, though the woman beside her did not seem to notice, or noticed and did not mind. The woman was tall without being tall, the way power adds inches to a person that a measuring tape cannot. A dark scarf wrapped her throat. Rain glazed her shoulders. A black leather tote lay braced against her knee as if it weighed something illegal and expensive. Beatrice Cole, though he did not know the name yet. He only knew that everything about her suggested an answer to a question he had not allowed himself to ask. James told himself the rules: count to 10, then turn away. The market had always smelled like Saturday, yeast and wet cardboard and citrus peel, but on this gray weekday, the scent turned his stomach. He had not meant to come at all. He had come because grief appoints its own errands. He had an empty evening at a house he could not teach to speak. Rain sounded different in rooms with no one to listen, so he had walked into the city to let other people's noise drown his own. Now the city had returned what he had given up. The child's eyes rose to meet his. Not the accidental brush of gaze between strangers, not the shy glance of a kid taught not to stare. A look lifted by instinct, by a chord struck in a place too deep to name. The world went narrow and faithful. He heard as clearly as he had ever heard anything, a voice that was not a voice. Dad? 9 years fell like rain off a hood. He stood there, an ordinary man in a navy jacket with nothing to show for a life except a scar on his knuckle and a habit of saving receipts, and thought he would be sick with hope. Olivia had teased him once, back when teasing was still allowed, about the way he would narrate facts to keep from drowning in feelings. The habit returned like a life raft. Facts. The girl was 10, maybe a shade smaller than 10. Hair the color of chestnut shells, a faint line at the left cheekbone, as if an old bruise had made a map and then faded. No earrings. Cheap sneakers. The careful way she held the cup, as if spills had a cost she could not pay. Lily, his heart named, before his mind could forbid it. The woman in gray tugged the child's elbow. "We're late," she said, low, not quite impatient, but with that thread of iron people use when the world is a door and they alone own the key. The child didn't move. James had been a shy man before tragedy burned shyness down to ash. When a fire has already taken everything, you don't mind the soot. He stepped forward. The rain was at his collar now, and the market's sounds thinned until there was only the drummer's thud of his own pulse. "Excuse me," he said, voice steady with a steadiness he was borrowing from nowhere. "Sorry, my mistake. Do you live around here?" The woman's head turned. She had the sort of face that is almost handsome, the kind you imagine at the polished end of a conference table. Her eyes evaluated and dismissed him in the time it takes for a coin to fall. "We don't answer questions from strangers," she replied, not unkindly, which is to say, unkindly in the elegant way. He swallowed. He had promised himself after the accident that he would never again beg from the universe in public. "Your daughter's cup. That cafe. Is it close?" The woman angled her body between him and the girl. "She's not my daughter," she said, which should have freed the breath in his lungs but did the opposite. "And you're blocking the way." The child peeked around the barrier of that gray coat. Rain had done what rain always does to hair, made honesty of it. A strand stuck to her forehead. Her eyes were too old for the face that wore them. He had seen photographs of his daughter so many times that the pixels must have been exhausted from being called to testify, yet nothing in any picture had prepared him for the weight of a living gaze. "What's your name?" he asked the child, gently, as if the syllables might bruise. The woman's hand descended, not hitting, not even rough, just a landing. "We have to go." "Just a second," he said. He heard himself and winced. The plea slid out like a habit. "I think—" He stopped. "What do you think, James? That the rain arranged a miracle? That the city kept your receipt and is offering a refund?" He reached into his pocket and found, ridiculously, absurdly, an orange he had bought in a gesture toward the possibility of eating dinner. He had carried it because a man with something in his pocket feels less like a man who has nothing. He held it out. "For you," he said to the child, and smiled the way you smile at a skittish animal without teeth. The girl's glance flicked to the woman's face, seeking permission. The woman's expression did not change. "We don't take food from, strangers," he finished for her. He tried again. "I'm James." The name sounded oddly like an alias. "I'm not—" He stopped lying. "I'm sorry. I saw your eyes and I thought of someone I lost." Something like understanding, or the echo of a memory of understanding, moved in the child's face. She shifted the cup to her left hand. With her right, she did not take the orange. She touched instead the pocket of her coat, where a small bulge suggested a pencil or a folded paper or a talisman of her own. "Time," the woman said quietly. It wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. He did something foolish then. He leaned, not forward. Forward would have been pleading, but sideways, into the line of rain, to gain the smallest angle from which he could see the cup. It was a cheap thing, cardboard and ink, but the logo's P had a little flourish on it, a loop at the tail like a fishhook. He knew that loop. He had sat, for months that felt like a century, at a corner table beneath a chalkboard menu and wondered if grief could be dissolved in caffeine. He had seen the owner, a woman with careful hands, add that loop on a stack of lids one winter morning when the logo stamp had broken. He had watched her draw it by hand so the cups wouldn't go out naked. Pat's Coffee House. He almost laughed because the world occasionally allows itself a sense of theater. "Do you like cocoa?" he asked the child suddenly, as if the question mattered to more than the weather. The girl's lips parted. A nod, small, like a secret. The woman's hand grew heavier on her elbow. James stepped back. He understood negotiations. He had once sold ideas to men who had none, and made them believe they were donors. But this was not a room with a table. This was rain and brick and breath. "I'm sorry," he said again, to both of them, to the city, to the sky. "I won't bother you." He held the orange like a surrender flag and felt ridiculous enough to live. They moved. The woman set their pace at brisk. The child matched it, but not before she looked over her shoulder and offered him something he would have paid the rest of his years to buy. A half-smile, brief and involuntary, the kind a child gives a stranger who has spoken gently. He didn't follow. He let them go, counting the steps the way he had counted heartbeats in the first nights after the accident, when sleep felt like a crime. Then, because the body is greedier than the mind, he moved at last. He wove through thinning stalls, past damp lemons and a sign that said, "Local honey" in a beekeeper's handwriting, and turned where they had turned. The gray coat flashed once at the end of the lane and vanished. He reached the corner too late and found only a street where the rain made maps of tire tracks and the curb played host to a congregation of pigeons with poor life choices. He stood there, taking inventory of his failure, and let the city breathe around him. A bus sighed. A man in a knit cap cursed a parking meter. The guitarist hit a chord that sounded like a bruise. He might have left then. He might have gone home to the house that was not home and the lights that did not care. But the market is a gossip and carries more memory than goods. As James turned, a woman from the pastry stall lifted a hand. "You looking for someone?" she asked. She had flour on her cheek and the amiable courage of retail. "Maybe," he said. "A girl, 10, perhaps, with a woman, dark coat." The girl had a cup from Pat's coffee house. The pastry seller's face softened into a regret older than both of them. "I've seen them," she said. "Couple of times. The woman doesn't buy much." "The girl's sweet. Sets the cups back exactly where they came from." She paused. "They go down 7th, toward the canal." He thanked her. He made the same mistake Hope makes. He hurried. 7th sloped away, wet and unilluminated, and he jogged 2 blocks before admitting that the rain had stolen their shadows. He stopped under an awning to breathe. His reflection in the shop window looked like a question without a mark. The door beside him opened. Warmth and the smell of coffee slipped out like a promise. A bell chimed with the modesty of small places. He turned in reflex, and the old chalkboard menu stepped forward from memory. Pat's, in shy capital letters. There were 2 tables, a case of muffins lined like patient soldiers, a bulletin board that had long since surrendered to babysitting ads and guitar lessons. Behind the counter, a woman with careful hands was drawing a looped P on a stack of lids. She looked up, and recognition moved across her face like weather. "You used to sit in the corner," she said. "3 winters ago. You always bought 2 drinks." He swallowed. "I thought if I ordered 2, he said, she might come." "Did she?" "No." The woman, Patricia Morgan, though he would learn the nickname later, nodded with a tenderness that made him want to sit on the floor. "You look better now," she said, not meaning the surface. "You're breathing." He glanced at the lids. "The girl—" The word tumbled out before he could put it in a sentence. "The Coco. She was here?" Pat tilted her head. "She has been," she said. "A few times, with a woman who is always in a hurry. The girl is not. She wipes the table when she leaves like she was taught to erase herself. I told her she didn't have to." James felt the world move, a subtle tilt, like a ferry pushing off the dock. "Do you know her name?" "She didn't offer it," Pat said. "But she draws." The woman reached beneath the counter and brought up a small paper square, the kind you tear from a pad by a register. On it, in a pencil's patient hand, a house leaned by a river under a cottonwood. There was a swing on the porch. The third stair had a crack. In the far right pane of the second-story window, a smudge you wouldn't see unless you had once cleaned it. James did not breathe. He did not look away because if he did, the picture would leave the world and he would be forced to follow. The drawing was not perfect. It was true. No realtor's brochure could have found that crack, that smudge. Only someone who had once paused on the third stair, who had once pressed a face to that window, who had once made a friend of the river's voice. Where did she... His throat closed on the verb. When? Yesterday, Pat said. I told her the drawing was beautiful. She said beauty is dangerous when you have to move fast. Pat's eyes darkened. I didn't like how that sounded. Rain ticked at the window with the persistence of bad news. Somewhere in the back, the espresso machine exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for years. James held the drawing like an artifact from a world that had been buried and suddenly remembered its own name. Do you want the cup? Pat asked, and he blinked at her, uncomprehending, until she showed him a lid with the looped P. It's not clean. She forgot it. People forget things here when they're thinking too hard. He took it. There were a few chocolate freckles on the rim where a careful mouth had pressed and released. He felt obscene with tenderness. Thank you, he said, a phrase too small for the gift. Pat's voice softened further. If you're going to find her, she said, you should go now. The woman moves her like weather, here, then gone. He tucked the drawing into his jacket, where it lay against his chest like a small, warm animal. He did not know yet the woman's name, or the name of the man in the shadows behind her. He did not know the shape of the city's trap, or the number of nights to come when he would lie awake teaching hope to breathe. He knew only the map of a house and the color of a child's eyes, and the way the rain had seemed for one long instant to write the word stay across the sky. He stepped back into the weather. The bell said goodbye. The market's scattered music resumed. Somewhere, beyond the brick and the rain and the gulls arguing with the day, a small figure in a slate-gray world was moving toward an evening that had already learned his name. James followed, not running, not yet, just walking. The way a man walks when the past has turned its face and the future is waiting in a coat he almost recognizes. The paper in his pocket whispered at each step. And for the first time in 9 crowded years, the city did not feel like a place where things were lost. It felt like a place where a thread had been found. Behind him, on the chalkboard at Pat's, someone had written the day's special and drawn, without thinking, a little loop on the P. Ahead, beyond the rain's silver curtain, a woman in gray tightened her grip, and a girl carried her cocoa carefully, as if the warmth inside it were a secret that might yet change the weather. There are nights that never end. They don't stay on the calendar. They live in the bone, in the dreams that wake you before dawn, in the smell of gasoline that isn't there. James Callahan kept his memory of that night the way some men keep a broken watch. Never working, always in his pocket. He didn't need the hands to move. He already knew the time. 9 years earlier, the rain had been heavier, more honest. It didn't dance like it had at the market. It fell with the full weight of a sky that wanted to bury the city in water. James was driving north on I-5, the wipers clawing at the windshield, Olivia in the passenger seat humming under her breath, and their daughter, 8 months old with cheeks like ripe peaches, giggling in the rear-facing car seat. Lily had just learned to grab her own toes, and she did it with the concentration of a scientist discovering fire. Seattle's lights were smeared on the wet road, red and gold and white blending into a painter's accident. James remembers thinking the city looked beautiful through rain. He remembers Olivia reaching back to adjust Lily's blanket. He remembers the low, certain contentment of believing the worst thing that could happen was missing the next freeway exit. Then the truck came. It came without lights, without warning, a black shape in the mirror that swelled faster than his mind could translate. There was no horn, no screech of brakes, just the impossible shove of steel against steel. The rear of their car lifted, twisted. Glass burst into the cabin like thrown gravel. James's hands were on the wheel, and then they weren't. One on Olivia's shoulder, the other reaching for the back seat that was no longer behind him in the same way. He would always remember the sound Olivia made, not a scream but a sharp inhale, as if she had seen the truth, and it was too large to name. Then the world folded sideways. The embankment rose to meet them. Metal bit into dirt, then into itself. The smell of burning rubber fought the rain. And somewhere between the second and third impact, Lily's cry turned into silence. When he woke, he was outside the car. He would never know if he had been thrown or crawled. Rain needled his face. His chest felt like a building after a fire, still standing but hollowed. The driver's side was crumpled in. Olivia's head tilted at an angle that told him the rest of his life would be divided into before and after. Her hand, still warm, rested in the air as if she had been reaching for him. He held it. He didn't look at her face yet. He couldn't. The back seat, God, the back seat, was twisted open like a jaw. The car seat straps dangled empty. The blanket was gone. So was she. "Lily!" he heard himself shout, but the rain tore the name apart. He stumbled, calling again, scanning the shoulder. The road, the drop toward the dark ribbon of water below. He thought he heard movement, a rustle, but it was only a strip of plastic from the truck's broken fender shivering in the wind. The truck was there, 20 yards ahead, idling. Its rear license plate was gone. The cab's windows were tinted black. The driver's silhouette was a shadow behind the glass, head turned toward him. Then, slowly, the truck rolled forward, merged into the rain, and vanished as if it had never been. No skid marks. No brake lights. Sirens came late. They always do in nightmares. Red and blue flashed against the wet asphalt, painting the scene in the colors of emergency and regret. Paramedics tried to pull him away from Olivia, but he wouldn't let go until someone promised him they'd find his daughter. The promise was a lie told in good faith. The police found no footprints in the mud, no sign of the child being thrown clear. They found, days later, a piece of duct tape in the roadside weeds, the sticky side flecked with blonde hairs. Not enough for certainty, just enough for suspicion. And suspicion is a poor substitute for truth. It was Special Agent Karen Doyle who first whispered the name. Raymond Cross. James's former business partner, the man who had once shared his dreams of remaking the tech world and later tried to dismantle James's life when their partnership dissolved. A man with the means, the nerve, and the kind of allies who prefer to be known only by the weight of their favors. But Cross had disappeared from the city like smoke through a crack. No sightings, no addresses, no way to prove he'd been anywhere near that rain-slick mile of highway. The case stayed open for a year, then cold. The files were boxed, the boxes shelved, the shelves dusted. James's grief was expected to do the same. But grief does not gather dust. It gathers teeth. For 9 years, he searched. Not every day, no one can survive that, but often enough to keep the wound fresh. He followed rumors of a blonde girl in Tacoma, a green-eyed child in Portland, a face in a blurry mall camera in Spokane. Each time, it was nothing. Each time, he came home to a house that waited in silence, and a closet where Olivia's scarf still hung with the patience of fabric that doesn't know it's been abandoned. He learned to live without answers. He thought he had made peace with the kind of life where the best you can hope for is not thinking about it for an hour, until the market, until the rain. until a pair of green eyes broke the clock and brought the night back in daylight. Now, 9 years later, James knew two things. The truck hadn't been an accident, and Raymond Cross had never stopped playing the game. The only question was how many moves ahead his enemy still was, and whether James could close that gap before the board was cleared for good. The first rule of finding someone who doesn't want to be found is this: don't look where everyone else is looking. James had learned that the hard way. For 9 years, his searches had been polite: requests to the police, appeals through old tech world contacts, half-hearted deep dives into public databases. It had been enough to keep the ache alive, not enough to find her. But the girl in the market, the girl with the green eyes and the cocoa cup, had rewritten the rules in an instant. Seattle at night was a city of contrasts. The glass towers kept their sterile glow for the men and women still chained to their keyboards. Down in the alleys, shadows pooled like forgotten debts. James moved between them like a man crossing between two languages, never fluent in either. He started with the obvious: traffic camera footage near the market. Getting it required a favor from an old systems engineer at the Department of Transportation, a man who still owed James for quietly burying a software bug that could have cost him his job. Hours later, James sat in his dim living room, the footage flickering across his laptop. Cars, buses, umbrellas. The drizzle made the lens shimmer. And then, there. Beatrice Cole. The name came later, but the figure was unmistakable. Gray coat, black scarf, the same precise stride James had seen at the market. Lily was beside her, the hood of her rain jacket up, her small hand hidden in the fold of Beatrice's sleeve. The footage told him more than he expected. Every time they crossed an intersection, Beatrice's eyes swept the street, not with the nervous glance of a tourist, but with the cold calculation of someone scanning for tails. She paused under awnings in ways that gave security cameras blind spots. It wasn't the walk of a guardian. It was the walk of a handler. By midnight, James had traced 3 days' worth of sightings, always the same pattern. The girl appeared only with Beatrice. No friends, no other adults, no school runs. That was the puzzle piece that didn't fit. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the map he'd sketched on the table. A messy web of street names and arrows. In America, a 10-year-old leaves a trail without trying: school records, medical appointments, library cards. Even a birthday cake order leaves a digital footprint. But when he called in a favor from Karen Doyle at the FBI, her answer was the one that iced his veins. James, there's nothing. No school enrollment under that description. No pediatric visits. No child benefits. Whoever she is on paper, she doesn't exist here. A ghost. That's what Lily had become. A child erased from every system that could have protected her. The next morning, James went back to the market. Not to chase her, he knew that would spook Beatrice, but to listen. Vendors are better than surveillance cameras. They see who lingers, who haggles, who always pays in cash. And if you've bought enough apples or coffee over the years, they'll tell you what they've noticed. It was the flower seller who broke the silence. That woman with the girl? Doesn't talk much. Buys white roses sometimes, never more than 3 stems. Why 3? James asked. Don't know, but she's careful. Keeps the girl close, like she's worried someone will steal her. The seller shrugged. Or like she's worried the girl will run. That night, James dug deeper. Beatrice Cole's name didn't come from any official database. It came from a pattern. A freight receipt Karen had once sent him, flagged in an old sting operation. A shipping address in West Seattle, linked to a woman who'd been questioned years ago for assisting a suspected smuggler. The smuggler had been Raymond Cross's associate. James's pulse kicked. The threads were tightening. Lily wasn't just missing, she was being hidden. Hidden by someone who knew how to disappear a person and who worked for the man James had been hunting in his nightmares for nearly a decade. It meant two things. Lily was in danger. He was closer than he had been in 9 years. James closed his laptop, the city lights crawling up the blinds like restless ghosts. Somewhere in Seattle, his daughter was sleeping under the same rain that pattered against his windows, and she had no idea her father was coming. The next day began gray and wet, the kind of Seattle morning where even the clouds seemed undecided about showing up. James parked 2 blocks from the market, not because he was worried about being seen, though he was, but because he wanted the walk. It kept his mind steady, his pace measured, his pulse from betraying the storm inside him. He wasn't here to confront Beatrice Cole, not yet. He was here for something smaller and infinitely more dangerous. Proof. Pat's coffee house sat halfway down a narrow side street, wedged between a florist's shop and a consignment bookstore. The glass was fogged from the inside, the kind of fog that carried the scent of cinnamon and warm milk. James hesitated outside, watching the slow swirl of steam rise from cups in customers' hands. Then he saw it. The loop on the letter P painted across the window. The same loop that curved across the cup in the little girl's hands yesterday. He pushed the door open. A brass bell announced him with a polite chime. The air inside was warmer than he'd expected, scented with espresso and sugar, carrying a faint undercurrent of something older. Wood polish, maybe, or the ghost of conversations that had mattered to someone once. Behind the counter stood Patricia Morgan, short, sturdy, with a thick braid of silver hair and the kind of eyes that seemed to measure truth before it left your mouth. She didn't look up right away, finishing a careful swirl of foam on a cappuccino. When she did, her gaze flickered with recognition, not of him exactly, but of something about him. "You're not a regular," she said. Not unkindly, not warmly either. "I'm looking for someone." James kept his voice steady. "A girl. Comes in here sometimes. 10 years old, dark hair, green eyes." Pat's expression didn't shift, but something in her shoulders went still. "You a cop?" "No." He hesitated. "Her father." That word always felt like stepping onto a frozen pond. One wrong move and it would crack beneath him. Pat leaned on the counter, considering him. "She comes in now and then," she said finally. "Not often enough to be local. She never has money. Sweeps the floor, wipes tables. I give her cocoa or a muffin. Doesn't say much." James swallowed. "Does she come alone?" "No, there's a woman. Tall, dark coat, keeps her close. Doesn't drink coffee, doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't even let the girl give her name." "That's her," James said. "That's the woman." Pat studied him a moment longer, as though weighing the risk of saying more. Then she bent down behind the counter and came up with a small piece of paper, a sketch drawn in pencil. "This is hers," she said. "She left it here yesterday." James took it carefully. It was a house. Not just any house, his house. The one he and Olivia had bought in the early days, before success and before ruin. The cedar siding, the porch swing, the slope of the roof down toward the river. Every detail was exact. Even the crack in the third step, something you wouldn't notice unless you'd lived there. James felt the air thin around him. "She drew this?" Pat nodded. "Said it was where she used to live. Said it was her favorite place in the world." His hand tightened on the paper. That was no coincidence. That was memory. Her memory. Pat watched him quietly. "You look like you've just been hit by a truck." "I was," James said softly. 9 years ago." Pat didn't press. She only poured him a coffee and set it in front of him, black and hot. "Whatever this is," she said, "you'd better move fast. The girl's smart, but she's scared. And that woman, she's not a mother." James slipped the drawing into his jacket. It was flimsy as evidence. But it was the kind of proof that went deeper than paper trails, the kind that could pierce through 9 years of doubt. As he stepped back into the damp air, he looked down the street toward the market. Somewhere out there, his daughter was walking under the same gray sky, carrying pieces of her past in the form of sketches. He wasn't imagining anymore. He knew. The thread of hope was real, and he wasn't going to let go. The rain had picked up by the time James reached the FBI field office in downtown Seattle. The streets glistened under the streetlights, every puddle holding a distorted reflection of the city, like fractured memories staring back at him. Inside, the air was a different kind of cold, filtered, dry, bureaucratic. Security scanners hummed at the entrance. A uniformed guard waved him through after checking his ID. Special Agent Karen Doyle was waiting for him on the second floor, leaning against the frame of her office door with her arms crossed. Her hair was pulled into the same no-nonsense bun she'd worn 9 years ago, back when they'd walked this same hallway searching for a baby who'd vanished into a rainstorm. "You said it was urgent," she said, leading him inside. James didn't sit. He pulled the folded drawing from his jacket pocket and placed it on her desk. She drew this, Lily. She's alive. Karen's eyes softened, but only for a heartbeat. She studied the paper, her gaze narrowing. "You're sure it's hers?" "There's a crack in the third porch step. She couldn't have known unless she'd been there." His voice was flat, steady, the kind of steadiness that only comes when there's no room left for doubt. Karen leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Tell me everything." He told her about the market, about Beatrice Cole, about the careful way the woman shielded the girl from strangers' eyes, about Pat's coffee house and the cocoa cup with the hand-drawn P, about the absence of school records, the clean slate where a life should have been. Karen's pen scratched across her notepad, but she wasn't writing everything, just the pieces that might fit into the puzzle she'd been holding on to for years. When he finished, she opened a folder from the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills, freight manifests, customs reports. She slid one across the desk. Beatrice Cole, 2 years younger, hair shorter, standing on a loading dock beside a shipping container. "She's not just some woman who happened to find your daughter," Karen said. Beatrice Cole worked for Raymond Cross, logistics mostly, moving product through the port. She disappeared from our radar after a botched sting operation in Tacoma. James felt his jaw tighten. "Raymond's still running operations through Seattle?" Karen nodded grimly. "Expanded them, actually. Smuggling, arms, you name it. He uses the docks, warehouses, private marinas. And if Beatrice has Lily—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of it landed anyway. James's mind was already running ahead. "We can track them. Follow Beatrice." Karen shook her head. "We have to be smart. If she suspects you're onto her, she'll move Lily. And this time it might be somewhere we can't reach." "Then give me something," James said. "Anything. I can't just sit here." Karen studied him for a moment, the way you look at someone standing too close to a cliff edge. Then she pushed a photograph toward him, a recent aerial shot of a warehouse lot near Pier 46. "We think Beatrice is using this location. It's one of Cross's hubs, heavy traffic in and out. We've been building a case, boss, but nothing solid enough to move." James traced a finger over the image. "If she's there, I can find out." Karen's tone sharpened. "James, this isn't a rescue mission you can walk into with a flashlight. These are people who don't hesitate." "I know exactly who they are," he said, voice low. "They took my wife from me. They took my daughter. I'm not letting them take another year. Karen closed the folder, but left it on the desk. I'll see what I can dig up on Beatrice's current movements. But you have to promise me something. No solo heroics. You call me before you make a move. James didn't promise. He picked up the drawing, slipping it back into his jacket, the paper warm from the hours it had spent close to his chest. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. It poured steady and unrelenting, blurring the city lights into halos. 9 years of silence had just broken. And with it came the certainty that the storm was far from over. The plan wasn't written down. Plans like this never are. They live in the body, in the steady rhythm of footsteps, in the careful way you keep your head turned just enough to see without being seen. James had been to the market 3 times since meeting with Karen Doyle, never staying longer than necessary, always leaving before the pattern of his presence could be noticed. He learned quickly that Beatrice and Lily kept to a schedule so loose it felt deliberate. Different days, different times, but always the same habit. They drifted toward the coffee shop before disappearing down side streets that swallowed them whole. He also noticed something else. Lily's eyes moved differently when Beatrice wasn't looking. Slower, searching, the way someone might look if they were silently measuring exits. That afternoon, the rain was a thin mist, too fine for umbrellas. The air smelled of wet cedar and roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. James stood by a stall selling carved wooden toys, watching from the reflection in the polished counter as Beatrice led Lily toward Pat's coffee house. When they emerged with cocoa in hand, James stepped into the flow of foot traffic, letting strangers carry him forward. His pulse kept pace with his stride. He timed it so that when Beatrice paused at a fruit stand, he was only a few steps away from Lily. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling to adjust his shoelace as if he'd dropped something. When she looked at him, he held out a small wrapped caramel. "Found this. Must have fallen from your bag." Her brow furrowed. "I don't—" "It's okay," he said, his voice low and gentle. "It's sweet. You can have it." She hesitated, then took it, fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. Her eyes, those green eyes, searched his face as if trying to place him in a half-forgotten dream. "Lily," Beatrice's voice snapped, the syllables clipped like the crack of a whip. She took the girl's arm, pulling her close. "We're leaving." James let them go, the caramel now in her pocket, its glossy wrapper hiding the truth, a tiny piece of medical-grade swab pressed into the underside of the candy. If she unwrapped it later, the swab would pick up traces from her fingers or lips, enough for DNA testing. By nightfall, James was in a small, privately run lab on the outskirts of the city. He watched as the technician, a man who owed him a favor from the old tech days, carefully removed the swab and sealed it in a test vial. 2 days, maybe less, the man said. "If she's yours, we'll know." James didn't sleep that night. He paced. He replayed every frame of Lily's face in his mind, the subtle tilt of her head, the guarded way she held herself near Beatrice. He thought about Olivia, how she'd laughed when Lily first learned to grip her thumb. He thought about Raymond Cross, and he thought about what he would do when the results came back. They arrived sooner than expected. Less than 48 hours later, James was back at the lab, watching the technician slide a single sheet of paper across the counter. Probability of paternity, 99.2%. It wasn't relief he felt. It was a tightening, like a rope pulled taut inside him. Proof didn't bring comfort. It brought responsibility. Across the city, in a dimly lit room above a dockside warehouse, Raymond Cross studied a grainy photograph handed to him by one of his men. In it, James Callahan was kneeling at the market, hand extended toward Lily. Raymond's jaw flexed. "He's getting bold," he said. "What do you want to do?" the man asked. Raymond's answer was quiet, almost bored. We move her. Tonight. Somewhere he'll never find her. It started with a phone call at 9:17 p.m. James was at his kitchen table, the DNA report spread out in front of him like a final verdict, when the ringtone cut through the silence. He didn't recognize the number, but he picked up anyway. "James, it's Pat." Her voice was low, urgent. In the background, he could hear the hum of the espresso machine and the clink of dishes being stacked. "She was here tonight," Pat said. "The girl, and the woman." His fingers tightened on the phone. "Lily?" "Yes." "They didn't stay long, but I overheard the woman talking to someone outside, on the phone. She said something about a long trip, and not coming back to Seattle." James pushed back from the table. "When?" "Soon." She didn't say exactly when, but it sounded like tonight or tomorrow morning. I thought you should know. He hung up and immediately called Karen Doyle. She answered on the second ring. "I was just about to call you," she said, voice tight. "We've picked up chatter from one of our informants at the port. Raymond's people are moving something big tonight, shipment through a private dock at Pier 46. And there's a mention of a package that has to be on the boat before sunrise." James didn't need the translation. "Lily." "That's my guess," Karen said. "If they get her on that ship, she's gone. We'll never find her in time." "What's the plan?" "We're moving in," Karen said. "FBI teams are on standby. But we can't hit the place blind. We need eyes on the ground first, to confirm she's there. My people are spread thin." "I'll do it," James said, without hesitation. "James, she's my daughter. You know I'll see her before anyone else does." There was a pause. "Fine, but you don't engage. You see her, you call me, and you stay alive long enough for us to get there. Do you understand?" He didn't answer. By 11:02 p.m., James was in his car, the city sliding past in streaks of sodium light and rain. The dashboard clock seemed to move faster than the tires on the road. The closer he got to the docks, the more the city changed. Neon gave way to rusted chain-link fences and the long skeletal arms of cranes, their silhouettes black against the low clouds. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel in the damp air. He parked 2 blocks away and went the rest of the way on foot, sticking to the shadows between warehouses. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounded, a slow, mournful note that felt like it belonged to another time. Pier 46 loomed ahead, lit by harsh white floodlights. Trucks idled in the yard, their exhaust drifting into the night. Men in dark jackets moved in and out of the warehouse, some carrying crates, others just standing watch. James edged closer, keeping low behind a stack of shipping pallets. From here he could see the loading bay. And then, a flash of small movement. Lily. She was standing just inside the bay door, a knit hat pulled low over her ears, hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket. Beatrice was beside her, scanning the yard with the same calculating eyes James had seen before. His chest tightened. She was right there, close enough to call her name, close enough to run. He stopped himself. One wrong move and Beatrice would drag her inside, out of sight. Or worse. James pulled out his phone and dialed Karen. "I see her," he whispered. "East side of the loading bay with Beatrice." "Hold position," Karen said. "Teams are 2 minutes out." But 2 minutes was a lifetime. James saw a man emerge from the shadows, a broad-shouldered figure in a black coat. Even before the light caught his face, James knew. Raymond Cross. Raymond walked straight to Beatrice. She leaned in to say something, and he glanced toward the water. One of the dock workers rolled a crate past them toward a waiting boat. Raymond placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, guiding her toward the pier. James's pulse hammered. He had no doubt now. The boat was leaving tonight. and his daughter was about to vanish over the horizon. 2 minutes was no longer an option. The first thing James noticed was how quiet the water was. It lay black and glassy beneath the floodlights, broken only by the faint ripple of the tide against the pilings. But above that stillness, the air thrummed, the low growl of diesel engines idling, the faint scrape of boots on wet metal, the muted clink of chain. From his position behind the pallets, James could see the boat more clearly now. 40 feet of steel and shadow, hull painted a dull blue that would disappear into the ocean at night. A narrow gangway connected it to the pier. At the base of that gangway, a single dock worker smoked, shoulders hunched against the cold. Beatrice was already moving Lily toward it. Raymond walked just behind, his dark coat brushing against hers. Even in the glare of the lights, his expression was unreadable, calm, almost bored, as if this were just another piece of cargo. James's hand tightened on his phone. "They're boarding now," he whispered into the line. Karen's voice came back, clipped and urgent. "We're in position. Wait for the signal." The signal came 10 seconds later. A voice boomed from somewhere beyond the warehouses. "FBI!" And the yard erupted. Floodlights swung wildly, throwing shadows that stretched and twisted across the pier. Engines revved, boots pounded, shouts tore through the air. 2 black SUVs barreled through the gates, followed by agents in tactical gear. The dock workers scattered, some ducking behind crates, others sprinting for the alleys between warehouses. The sharp metallic clatter of weapons being raised echoed against the water. Raymond reacted instantly. He yanked Lily forward, breaking into a run toward the gangway. Beatrice flanked them, her body angled like a shield. James was already moving. The rain came harder now, driven sideways by a sudden gust off the sound. Under the floodlights, it looked like falling glass. James cut across the yard, weaving between stacks of cargo. A crate split open beside him as a bullet smacked into it, showering him with splinters. Someone shouted his name, Karen maybe, but he didn't slow. Raymond reached the gangway first. Beatrice shoved Lily onto the narrow metal walkway, her small frame swaying with the boat's movement. "Move!" Raymond barked, and for the first time, James heard urgency in his voice. James pushed harder, his shoes slapping against the wet pier. He was almost there when a dock worker stepped into his path, a length of pipe raised. James ducked the swing and drove his shoulder into the man's gut, sending him sprawling into a coil of rope. The FBI team was closing in now, voices cutting through the storm. "Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them!" Lights flashed in the corners of James's vision, disorienting him. He saw Beatrice glance back, saw the moment her eyes locked on him. Her mouth twisted, but instead of pulling Lily farther, she stepped aside just enough to block the agent's line of sight. Raymond turned too, his face tightening. "Callahan!" he spat, the name jagged in his mouth. And then James was there, one arm around Lily, pulling her back from the gangway, his body between her and Raymond. He felt the jolt of contact, the fragile weight of her, the sharp intake of her breath. Raymond lunged. An agent shouted, and a flash of light exploded at the edge of James's vision, someone tackling Raymond to the ground. The gangway rocked violently as another agent dragged Beatrice back onto the pier, cuffs snapping shut on her wrists. In the sudden pocket of stillness, Lily clung to him. Her voice was so soft he almost missed it under the rain. "Dad." It was the first time she'd said it. The first time in 9 years. James couldn't speak. His arms tightened around her. His chest shaking, and for a moment, the noise of the raid faded into nothing but the sound of her breathing against him. But even in that moment, he knew it wasn't over. Raymond Cross was in custody, for now, but men like him had long shadows, and James had just stepped into all of them. For a few precious seconds, James thought it was over. Lily was in his arms. Beatrice was in cuffs. Raymond Cross was on the ground under 2 FBI agents, his cheek pressed against the wet concrete. The rain drummed on the pier in a steady rhythm, almost like applause. Then Raymond moved. It wasn't the wild thrash of a man panicking. It was precise, controlled. He shifted just enough to throw his weight sideways, knocking one agent off balance. In the same motion, his hand shot to the small of his back. James saw the glint of metal before anyone shouted. "Gun!" The world contracted. Floodlights became a white haze. Shouts became muffled. James's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He shoved Lily behind a stack of cargo crates, using himself as a barrier. A single shot cracked the air. The smell of gunpowder cut through the salt and diesel. An agent stumbled, falling to one knee. Raymond was up now, using the chaos as cover. His eyes locked on James, not in rage, but in something colder. Recognition. He started toward them, weaving between agents and dock workers like water finding the lowest point. James stepped out from behind the crates, keeping himself between Raymond and the spot where Lily crouched. "You think this ends tonight?" Raymond's voice was calm, almost conversational. "It does for you," James said. Raymond smiled faintly. "You've spent 9 years chasing a ghost. I gave her a life." "You stole her life!" James snapped, his voice low but shaking with fury. Raymond took another step, the gun still in his hand, angled low. "She would have grown up in your glass house, living in her mother's shadow. With me she was free." James's pulse pounded in his ears. "Free? To be hidden? To have no name, no friends, no future?" For the first time, Raymond's expression twitched. Just slightly. But it was enough to know James had struck something. Behind them, Karen's voice cut through the rain. "Drop it, Cross!" But Raymond didn't. He shifted his aim toward the crates, toward where Lily was hidden. James moved. He lunged forward, slamming into Raymond's gun arm. The weapon skidded across the wet concrete. The two men crashed against the pier railing, the wood groaning under their combined weight. Raymond fought like someone who had been in more than a few back-alley brawls. Dirty, efficient, using elbows and knees. James took a blow to the ribs that stole his breath, but he didn't let go. He thought of Olivia, of the empty crib, of 9 years of nights staring at a door that never opened, and he held on. 2 agents closed in. One got a hand on Raymond's shoulder, the other yanked his arms back. Cuffs clicked shut with finality. Raymond didn't struggle this time. He just looked at James with that same cold half-smile. "You think she's safe now? There are others. You can't watch her every second." James stepped forward so close that only Raymond could hear. "Try me." When Raymond was finally dragged away, James turned back toward the crates. Lily was peeking out, her eyes wide, her hair damp and plastered to her cheeks. He knelt, and she stepped into his arms without hesitation. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. Then, almost shyly, "I knew you'd come." The words cracked something in him that had been locked tight for 9 years. He closed his eyes, holding her as the rain eased into a soft mist. For the first time in nearly a decade, James Callahan believed they might actually have a tomorrow. The rain had stopped by morning. Seattle woke under a thin veil of mist, the kind that curled off rooftops and drifted over quiet streets. For James, it felt like the first day in years where the sky wasn't pressing down on him. Lily sat beside him in the passenger seat, her small hands folded in her lap, clutching the drawing of the old riverside house Pat had given him. She hadn't let go of it since last night. Every few minutes she glanced at him as if to make sure he was still there. He drove away from the city, following the road out toward the suburbs, where the houses stood farther apart and the trees grew older. Finally, he turned into a gravel driveway that crunched softly beneath the tires. The house wasn't the one in the drawing, not yet, but it was warm and real. Pale blue siding, a small porch with space for a swing, a yard where the grass still held dew. Sunlight broke through the thinning clouds and spilled across the front steps. "This is home," he said quietly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paint. The living room windows looked out toward a patch of woods, and the kitchen table was already set with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. James had prepared it before picking her up from the safe house the FBI had used overnight. He watched her wander through the rooms, her fingers trailing over door frames, cabinet handles, the edge of the couch. Every new detail seemed to draw a question in her eyes, though she didn't voice them all. In the small bedroom at the end of the hall, sunlight pooled on the floorboards. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. James knelt beside her. "There's someone I want you to know about," he said. "Your mom, Olivia." Her gaze flicked to his, curious. "She loved music. She'd sing in the kitchen while she cooked, and she had this laugh." He smiled faintly, remembering. "It could turn a bad day around. She used to hold you and dance around the living room. You'd giggle until you couldn't breathe." Lily's fingers tightened on the quilt. "I remember a song," she said slowly, "but it's fuzzy." "That's okay," James said, his voice thick. "We'll make new ones, too." They spent the afternoon together. He showed her how the old porch light flickered twice before turning on, how the swing in the backyard creaked in the wind like an old friend clearing its throat. She asked if she could help plant flowers when spring came, and he promised they would. Later, as the sun dropped low, they sat on the swing, its chains humming softly. Lily sipped cocoa from a mug far too big for her hands. For a moment, she looked entirely at peace. Then she turned toward him. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Always." Something in her eased at that, shoulders settling, breath coming slower. And then, for the first time since he'd found her, she smiled. Not the quick, guarded curve of lips he'd seen at the market, but a full, unshadowed smile that reached her eyes. From the porch, the yard stretched out under a sky washed clean by the night's rain. Light spilled from the windows behind them, warm against the growing dusk. James felt the weight of the past years, every false lead, every empty night, begin to loosen. There would be things to face, memories to untangle, fears to quiet. But for now, there was sunlight on the porch, the sound of his daughter's laughter, and the certain knowledge that they had begun again. And this time, no one would take her away. Thank you for staying with this story from the very first moment to the very last. The journey of James and Lily is not only a search, but also a reminder that hope, no matter how deeply buried, can always find its way back. My gratitude goes to those who have waited, believed, and held on to even the thinnest thread of faith when everything seemed lost. If this story has touched you, perhaps each of us carries our own Lily, something precious we have never truly let go of. May you always keep that light in your heart. I look forward to meeting you again in the next story.